So whenever I post a panoramic photo, one of the questions I'm most frequently asked is how do you develop a 10-inch by, this is in this case 60-inch negative. I'm actually set up to shoot and process up to 72 inches, so that's a 6-foot negative. And it's a question that I researched quite a bit when I started this process. And so my way is not, the way I do it is not the only way or the right way, but it's the way that works for me, the way I like to work, the amount of chemistry I want to use, and frankly, the amount of time I want to spend sloshing film around in total darkness. So any of you who process your own film, 35 millimeter or medium format, like this 120 roll here, which is kind of like a nice small version of the large negative, same film base, actually, as the Cirkut negatives that I'm using with the aerial film or the expired Cirkut film. You're probably familiar with just using one of these tanks, fitting the film onto the spool. And then once you've got it spooled up, you put the lid on and you can do the rest of the work in room light in your darkroom, which is nice. And if you're working with large formats, say 4x5, you could do tray development. You might use a Jobo. In my process of researching ways to develop Cirkut film, I came across the Beyond the Zone System method. This is Beyond the Zone System by the late Phil Davis. And his method was to use these tubes. These are the specific Beyond the Zone System tubes that were made and sold by Phil and his friend Fred Newman, who also has a YouTube channel. I'll link to Fred's channel in the description. What's nice about these, you take your 4x5 piece of film in darkness, you roll it, slide it in, pour in your pre-soak or your developer, and cap it, and you're rolling it in a tray of water, the temperature that you want to be developing at, just to help give you a water bath kind of buffer there. And surprisingly, when you dump out the developer and then add your water stop, you can do this in subdued light, say with the 40-watt bulb about 6 feet away from the tube, and not have to worry about fogging the film. I've done density tests with my densitometer, and there's really no measurable difference in density from doing this in complete darkness versus with a dim light bulb. So this kind of got me thinking, along with some other forum posts and a video talk that Cirkut photographer Christopher Creighton did, which I will also link to in the description, where he discusses processing in a piece of black ABS plumbing pipe, basically sewage drain pipe that you can get at the hardware store. So what I have done for my Cirkut negatives is to build a 6-foot long one of these, and I'll show you that. So this is my scaled up version of this 4x5 Beyond the Zone System, or BTZS, processing tube. So as opposed to holding a 4x5 piece of film, this is made to hold up to a 10 by 72 inch sheet of Cirkut roll film. A couple of things that I'm doing here to ease the process. When you're emptying one of these, it's easy to just pick up the thing and dump it out and refill it. When you're dealing with a tube this large, and I'm typically using about 2 to 4 liters of chemistry at a time, I have added a 45-degree elbow here to help with pouring. So I've got sort of a pour spout. It also helps for then adding the chemistry, so I'm not having to tip this whole thing up to pour a pitcher of chemistry in. And so I use a threaded plug on this end. On the far end, where I actually load the film, to keep this, keep a smooth entryway for the film so it's not getting caught on threads or anything, I actually use one of these clamp-on rubber, what they call a Fernco fitting. So I have a nut driver, and it goes on pretty quick. It slides on. It's actually a little more watertight than the cap is. That cap on the loading end is always dribbling out a little bit of chemistry, so this keeps at least one end from losing chemistry. And this end is sometimes, I wish I'd built a slightly larger sink. This is always slightly hanging over, so it also keeps drips from falling outside the sink. I've also built, and this is again borrowing from Christopher Creighton's method, this roller base, which is basically 1x6 lumber. I used my pocket hole jig, my Craig jig, to put together, and some leftover casters I had from a small cart. Just create a roller base. You know, with the smaller tubes, you're rolling those in a tray of water, so they're kind of floating and sloshing around. I know Jim Galley, who has posted about using this method over on Photrio. He works a little bit smaller. I think he's doing up to 48-inch lengths of Cirkut film. He's got a tabletop or a countertop where he's simply just rolling the tube back and forth. So that's another method. But again, just due to the sheer size and when he keeps this over my sink, this roller base is pretty nice. I will probably, these were just casters that I had around. They're really cheap little plastic 1-inch casters. This is almost too much for them. So next time at the hardware store, I'll probably pick up some decent casters with real bearings in them. You can hear there's a little bit of scraping sound there. But this is working really well for me. I'm really happy with a few things. One, the amount of chemistry. Anybody that does rotary development knows that you can get away with using a lot smaller volume of chemistry. Those that are doing tray development with circuit negatives of this size, you're typically looking at 4 to 8 liters of developer, which is just a lot. You're gonna have to wear gloves, probably like dishwashing gloves. Your hands are in the chemistry. You've got to have the lights off for the 10 to 15 minutes maybe that you're developing. I'm really clumsy. I'm bound to get sloshed developer all over myself, all over the surface I'm working on. So this allows me to use a lot less chemistry. I'm usually using about 2 liters of developer, and maybe 2 to 4 liters of the other subsequent steps. And then once I pour the developer in, I put the caps on and I can turn my light on. This is a 40-watt bulb. It's roughly 6 feet from the far end here, plus with the 45-degree elbow, that also reduces the amount of light. Again, I have tested one of the negatives in here, looking at the film base on my densitometer from this end to the far end where there's really no light, getting in. There's no measurable or appreciable difference in density, so I'm not getting any fog that way, which is surprising, but also really nice because I can, I really like this method. You could also do tray development. So for my prints, I've built these 6-foot long acrylic trays. I got sheets of acrylic cut to size from our local glass shop. Again, when I'm processing Van Dyke prints in this, I'm using up to 2 gallons of chemistry, and for me that's just a lot of developer. If I can economize, that's less chemistry I've got to store, less that's going down the drain since I'm doing typically one-shot development. There are guys that do this and they get great results, and more power to them. It's not for me. And again, if you're doing tray development, you got to have the lights off for the whole time that you're doing the development step, until you get your stop and fixer in there. And so that's certainly another workable method. Another method that folks use will be to take a dish pan like this and either hold this in the tray, scrolling it back and forth during your development time at a somewhat steady rate, or you're sort of seesawing the negative through back and forth like this. Again, I'm really clumsy and messy when it comes to working with darkroom chemistry or anything, even in the kitchen. The other issue is that your hands are in contact with these ends. So if you're doing that seesaw method, you probably want to give yourself a few inches of lead in and lead out on your negative, because these ends where you're touching are going to be warmer than the rest of the negative. You're going to have higher density on your ends doing this way. So again, I really like the tube method for even controlled development. Helps me from also damaging or kinking or scraping the negative. So we're going to walk through what it looks like to process a negative in this tube processor. So back on my dry side bench, I unroll a piece of fiberglass window screen, and behind that you'll see a velvet covered piece of PVC pipe. Now it's time to turn out the lights and put on my infrared goggles. So we'll unspool the film here on the workbench. I was fortunate with my camera to get a nice supply of original Kodak boxes, film spools, and this paper leader, which allows you to load the film in subdued light. So here I'm just gently unrolling the paper leader, which I've taped on with some acid-free tape. So we're going to peel off that tape. Sometimes it gets a little stuck, so I've kind of edited it here so you don't have to watch the painful parts. But ideally it goes like this, peeling nice and cleanly off so we can use that leader. Then I'm going to unroll the film emulsion side up on that window screen. I actually use a spring clamp to hold everything into place because everything wants to curl and roll back on itself. Again, I usually give myself a couple of inches on either end of the film, so I'm not worrying about any damage to the emulsion there. So the window screen helps prevent the film from sticking to the inside of the plastic pipe. This much film creates a lot of surface tension once it gets wet, and so releasing it from the pipe can be a challenge. Then I'm placing the velvet wrapped piece of pipe on top. This sort of just acts as a guide to help the film hold its shape as I roll it lengthwise. It also gives some support so the film doesn't kink or bend or get any damage to the film base. So now I'm just going to carefully roll the film and the window screen lengthwise around that velvet wrapped pipe, kind of making a little bit of a window screen film and pipe burrito, and then just going to carefully slide this into our 4-inch ABS pipe film processor. And really want to make sure that the pipe is dry as we slide and guide the film in, and try to avoid crinkling or kinking the film. The weight of that PVC pipe that's in the middle really kind of helps support everything to hold its shape and act as one physical unit. So now I'm going to slide the PVC pipe out and set that aside. I'm going to run to this end and just see if I can reach in and pull it a little bit, make sure that we're not crinkled on that side or that anything's binding. And then we're just going to gently coax it the rest of the way in. And you'll notice the film doesn't touch all the way at the bottom, which is good because that gives us a little bit of a trough to keep the chemistry from touching the film before we're ready to agitate, and rotate the pipe. So here I'm attaching that Fernco fitting with the nut driver. It slips right on. This provides a nice seal on that end that overhangs the sink. It also, I feel like, gives me a nice clean end for loading, so I'm not having to worry about scraping on the pipe threads. I prefer to do a pre-soak with this method, so I'm adding a gallon of distilled water. And here you can really see that 45-degree elbow really helps when pouring chemistry in with something of this size. So I had a full gallon, and then as I'm mixing the developer, I give this pipe a few rotations just to distribute the water around. So here we are capping it up. And then we're going to give it a few turns just to distribute the water on the surface of the film for our pre-soak. It takes about 5 minutes for me to mix the developer. Here I'm mixing PyroCat HD at a 1:50 ratio. I find this gives me good density for alt process prints like Van Dyke's and calotypes. So our lights are back off to add the developer. This part I'm not typically wearing the infrared goggles. You can pretty much do this by feel and sound. So we're going to empty out our pre-soak water. And then we add about 2 liters of developer is what I tend to use for a negative of this size. So once we cap the tube at this point, from this point forward, we're able to work in dim light. So I'm going to get this cap on, and then we can turn on our 140 watt bulb. Actually, I've got them both on here.
And I start with about 15 to 30 seconds of continuous rotation just to get that developer well distributed on the surface of the film. And then I'm going to settle into a rhythm of about 5 rotations forward, 5 rotations backward, and then I'll tip the tube from one end to the other, and I'll repeat that cycle. Each of those cycles takes about 15 seconds, and I will repeat that cycle throughout the development time here. And here as we get ready to empty the developer, I'm just going to dim the room light to reduce the risk of fogging the film. And here we go out with the developer. Takes just a few seconds to empty it, probably about 15 seconds really. Then we're going to add a gallon of tap water for our stop bath. Simply just do a water stop for this type of processing. And we'll agitate this continuously for about 3 minutes. And while it's agitating, I'm going ahead and filling up a couple of jugs of water for our wash cycles that we'll do after the fixer. But after that water stop bath, I will add about 2 liters of rapid fix. Here I'm using the Eco Pro mixed at I believe a 1-to-4 ratio. And the fixer gets about 5 minutes of rotation. And at the end of fixing, I collect that fixer in a small tub for reuse. I get a decent amount of use out of the fixer. Generally get several negatives out of a gallon. And I'll set that tray aside and just use a funnel to pour it back into our working solution jug. Try to drain as much of the fixer as I can out here, take my time with this part. And once I'm satisfied that we're empty, we're just going to set that fixer aside. And now to wash, I use sort of a modified Ilford method where I fill it with a gallon of water. I'm going to rotate 5 rotations. The second round gets 10 rotations, and so on, increasing by 5 rotations up until we're doing 25 rotations on our 5th and final wash. I arrived at this method by mixing up some HT1 and doing that residual hypo test. And I found that those 5 changes of water got me to what would be considered an archival wash using this tube. So about 5 gallons of water all told. And then I've also, since recording this, I'll do a final rinse with some distilled water. And then here we are at the end of that 5th cycle. And again, just going to tip it to get everything out. Try to get our film as dry as possible before we pull it out of the tube so we don't have a whole lot of water dripping everywhere. Then I take an 8x10 tray before I remove the film, and I fill that with distilled water and a couple drops of photo flow. And this is where we'll do sort of a seesaw through this tray just to help our film dry without any streaks or water spots. Where I live, our tap water is extremely hard, like between 250 and 300 parts per million. So I'm always fighting hard water spots, and I do find that this final distilled rinse with the photo flow prevents water spots. Here I'm getting ready to unload the film, and even with the window screen, I've got to work just a little bit to release that surface tension and get it to release from the sides of the tube. So just a little bit of a gentle tug there, and we'll start to be able to slide the film out. And out comes the negative and the screen, kind of carefully supporting it here so it doesn't crumple or crinkle or crease the negative anyway, and then sort of gently let it fall out. Then I'm going to peel off that window screen and just sort of drop it into one of the buckets. I'll come back and clean up that screen to rinse with photo flow once I get the negative hung up to dry. You can see here really one of the reasons I keep it to about 6 feet is I'm only about 5'8", and this is about the most my wingspan will handle. So then I take an end of the negative in each hand, and I'm just going to gently run it through this photo flow on the floor, and that's going to, again, help prevent water spots and give us a nice clean negative here at the end of the process. So we just get it to where we can see some of the water on the surface of the negative, and we're going to drape it through there very gently. There's a little bit of Cirkut panoramic negative yoga we're doing here. There we go. Got a couple of passes through the photo flow. Then I'm just going to attach a couple of film clips to hang this to dry. And here we are. Here's the finished negative. Nice even development from this processing tube. Really clean. Really pretty happy with this method. So thanks for watching. Hope you learned something. Love to hear folks' feedback in the comments here. So feel free to let me know what you think.